My name is Elena Hartwell, and for 3 years, I've been living under the suffocating weight of my mother-in-law's certainty that I'm a calculating gold digger who ensnared her precious son with feminine wiles and strategic manipulation. What she doesn't know, what nobody knows, is that I've been conducting the most important investigation of my career, and she's been my primary target from the moment I said I do. The morning everything changed started like any other Wednesday in our pristine suburban home. I was reviewing financial documents at the kitchen table, my laptop surrounded by carefully organized stacks of bank statements, investment portfolios, and legal paperwork that looked like routine household management but represented something far more significant. My husband David had already left for his morning run, which gave me exactly 47 minutes of uninterrupted work time before he returned, showered, and headed to his family's investment firm. That's when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the security monitor and felt my pulse quicken. 2 people in dark suits stood on my front porch, badges visible in their hands, expressions serious and professional. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the culmination of 18 months of meticulous documentation and careful planning. But seeing them there, knowing what was about to unfold, still sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I opened the door with the composed expression I'd perfected during years of dealing with hostile witnesses and skeptical juries. "Good morning. How can I help you?" The taller agent, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes, showed me her credentials. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Agent Sarah Morrison with the Financial Crimes Division. This is Agent Chin. We need to discuss your investigation." I nodded and stepped aside to let them enter. "I've been expecting you. Please come in." What they didn't know, what my husband didn't know, what his family didn't know, was that Elena Hartwell wasn't my real name. Well, it was now legally since my marriage. But for the first 30 years of my life, I'd been Elena Vasquez, a financial forensic investigator specializing in complex embezzlement cases and sophisticated fraud schemes. I'd spent a decade building a reputation for uncovering financial crimes that others missed, for following paper trails that led to the most respected members of society, for proving that the most charming facades often hid the darkest secrets. The Hartwell case had landed on my desk 2 years before I met David, when a whistleblower from inside their investment firm contacted my agency with allegations of massive client fund misappropriation. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars diverted from retirement accounts, college funds, and trust funds into private investments that benefited only the Hartwell family. But the scheme was elegant in its complexity, the paper trail expertly obscured, and the victims didn't even know they'd been robbed. My supervisor had warned me it would be nearly impossible to prove. The Hartwells were pillars of the community, major donors to charity, respected members of the country club. Patricia Hartwell, the family matriarch, was known for her philanthropic work, and her son David was considered a catch, handsome, successful, and apparently devoted to continuing the family's legacy of community service. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I would go undercover. It took 6 months to establish my new identity, to create the perfect backstory that would make me attractive to David Hartwell while positioning me to access the family's financial records. I became Elena Martinez, a freelance graphic designer from a middle-class family, pretty enough to catch his eye, but not so sophisticated that I'd seem threatening to his mother. I engineered our chance meeting at a coffee shop near his office, struck up a conversation about the book he was reading, and let him think he was pursuing me. David was easier to charm than I'd expected. He was genuinely kind, funny, and surprisingly insecure despite his privileged upbringing. Within weeks, he was introducing me to his friends, and within months, he was talking about a future together. I told myself I was just doing my job, that the affection I felt for him was strategic, that the guilt gnawing at my stomach was just occupational hazard. But Patricia Hartwell saw through me immediately. From our first meeting, she treated me like a threat to be eliminated. She never said anything overtly hostile. Patricia was far too sophisticated for direct confrontation, but her message was clear. I wasn't good enough for her son, I didn't belong in their world, and she would do everything in her power to prove that I was exactly what she suspected me to be. "She's very pretty," she'd told David within my hearing, "but there's something calculating about her eyes. You can always tell a woman's true intentions by watching how she looks at things. And she looks at our home like she's appraising it." She wasn't wrong, of course. I was appraising everything. The original artwork that suggested assets far beyond what their legitimate income could support, The casual mention of international properties that weren't listed on any tax documents I could access, the expensive gifts Patricia gave to charity that seemed designed more for tax benefits than genuine philanthropy. But David defended me, and as our relationship deepened, I found myself in an impossible position. The investigation that was supposed to take 6 months stretched into a year, then 18 months, as I fell genuinely in love with the man I was supposed to be deceiving. When he proposed, I said yes because saying no would have blown my cover, but also because I genuinely wanted to spend my life with him. The problem was that the deeper I went into their family's finances, the more horrific the scope of their crimes became. This wasn't just embezzlement, it was systematic theft that had destroyed lives. I'd identified at least 47 victims, including elderly clients who'd lost their entire retirement savings and young families who'd seen their children's college funds disappear into Patricia's private investment schemes. And David knew. Maybe not the full extent, maybe not the specific details, but he signed documents, he attended meetings, he was a licensed partner in the firm. There was no way he was completely innocent, which meant the man I'd fallen in love with was complicit in his mother's crimes. Agent Morrison sat across from me in my living room, her expression professional but sympathetic. We've reviewed all the evidence you've provided over the past 18 months. The documentation is exceptional, Elena. This might be the most thorough undercover investigation I've seen from a civilian. I'm not exactly a civilian, I reminded her. Just because I'm working this case independently doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. Agent Chin leaned forward. The question now is timing. Are you ready to move forward with the arrests? Because once we execute the warrants, there's no going back. Your marriage, your life here, it all changes. I nodded, my throat tight. I'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but the reality of ending my marriage to expose my husband's family felt like tearing my heart out with my bare hands. There's something else, Agent Morrison said carefully. We've been monitoring Patricia Hartwell's communications, and she's been telling people that she's hired a private investigator to look into your background. She's convinced you're hiding something. I almost laughed at the irony. Patricia's instincts had been correct from the beginning. I was hiding something. Just not what she thought. She's been calling you a gold digger to anyone who'll listen, Agent Chin added. Says you trapped her son into marriage for his money. I know, I said quietly. David's starting to believe her. It was true. Over the past few months, as Patricia's campaign against me had intensified, I'd watched my husband's confidence in our marriage erode. He'd started questioning my motives, asking pointed questions about my past, looking at me with the kind of suspicion that made my chest ache. The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself without revealing the truth, so I had to watch the man I loved lose faith in me while I prepared to destroy his family. That's when we heard David's key in the front door. He walked into the living room, still wearing his running clothes, sweat-stained and breathing hard. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he took in the 2 federal agents sitting in our living room. Elena, what's going on? Agent Morrison stood and showed him her badge. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Agent Morrison with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to ask you some questions about Hartwell Investment Management. I watched the color drain from David's face, watched his eyes dart between the agents and me, watched the moment he realized that his mother had been right about one thing. His wife had been hiding something significant. I don't understand, he said slowly. Why are you here? What does this have to do with Elena? Your wife has been assisting with our investigation into financial irregularities at your family's firm, Agent Chin explained. She's provided extensive documentation of fraudulent activities. David stared at me, his expression shifting from confusion to betrayal to something that looked like grief. You've been investigating my family? I stood up, my hands trembling slightly. David, I can explain. How long? His voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been lying to me? Before I could answer, we heard Patricia's voice calling from the front hallway. David, darling, I saw the strange cars in your driveway. Is everything? She stopped mid-sentence as she entered the living room and saw the federal agents. For a moment, nobody moved. Patricia stood frozen in the doorway, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light, her expensive handbag clutched to her chest like armor. She was dressed for one of her charity committee meetings, all polished elegance and maternal concern, but I could see the exact moment she understood what was happening. Her eyes found mine, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. Not just of the situation, but of me. For the first time in 3 years, Patricia Hartwell was looking at me and seeing exactly who I really was. "Patricia Hartwell," Agent Morrison said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." What happened next was chaos. Patricia began protesting her innocence, demanding to call her lawyer, insisting that this was all a misunderstanding. David was shouting questions at me, at the agents, at his mother, his voice cracking with betrayal and confusion. Agent Chun was reading Patricia her rights while Agent Morrison tried to maintain control of the situation. But through it all, I found myself focusing on Patricia's face as the handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists. For 3 years, she'd looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, had told everyone who would listen that I was a calculating woman who'd trapped her son for financial gain. She'd been so certain of her own moral superiority, so convinced that I was the threat to her family's integrity. Now, as federal agents led her toward the door, she finally understood the truth. I hadn't trapped her son, I'd trapped her. And the gold I'd been digging for wasn't David's inheritance, but the evidence that would put her in federal prison for the rest of her life. "Elena," David said, his voice breaking, "please, just tell me how much of it was real." I turned to face my husband, the man I'd deceived and investigated and genuinely loved, and tried to find words for the impossible truth. "The investigation was real. The evidence is real. Your mother stole millions of dollars from innocent people, David. The victims are real." "That's not what I asked." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with unshed tears. "My feelings for you are real. Everything else was necessary." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "I don't even know who you are." "Yes, you do," I said softly. "You know exactly who I am. You've known me for 3 years, David. The only thing that's changed is that now you know why I'm here." As the FBI agents processed the scene, as Patricia was led away in handcuffs, as my marriage dissolved in real time around me, I thought about the 47 victims whose stolen money would finally be recovered. I thought about the elderly woman who'd called my agency in tears because her retirement savings had disappeared. I thought about the young couple who'd lost their children's college fund and didn't understand why. Patricia Hartwell had been right about one thing. I had trapped her son. But not for money, not for status, not for any of the reasons she'd imagined. I'd trapped him in the truth, and sometimes the truth is the most devastating snare of all. 3 hours later, I sat alone in my living room, still wearing my morning clothes, staring at the legal documents scattered across my coffee table. David had left with his lawyer to figure out his own legal exposure. Patricia was in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk. And I was exactly where I'd started 18 months ago, alone with evidence of crimes that would destroy a family, holding the weight of justice in my hands. My phone rang. It was my former supervisor at the agency. "I saw the news," he said. "Hell of a job, Elena. This is going to be the case that defines your career." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "If I still have a career after this." "Are you kidding? Every agency in the country is going to want to hire you after this. You single-handedly brought down one of the most sophisticated financial fraud schemes we've seen." I looked around my living room, our living room, at the home I'd shared with David, at the life I'd built on a foundation of lies and investigation and genuine love. What if I don't want to be hired? What if I just want to go back to being Elena Hartwell, graphic designer, married to a man who trusts me? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "You can't unknow what you know, Elena. And you can't unfeel what you feel. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be going forward?" After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house and tried to imagine a future where I could be both the woman who'd fallen in love with David Hartwell and the investigator who'd destroyed his family. I tried to picture a world where justice and love could coexist, where doing the right thing didn't feel like losing everything that mattered. Outside, I could hear the news vans pulling up, the reporters setting up their cameras, the neighbors whispering behind their curtains. Soon, the whole world would know that Patricia Hartwell, pillar of the community and devoted mother, had been arrested for stealing millions of dollars from the people who trusted her most. They'd also know that her daughter-in-law, the woman she'd called a gold-digging schemer for 3 years, had been the one to bring her down. But what they wouldn't know, what I was still figuring out myself, was whether the woman who'd spent 3 years living a lie could find a way to build something true from the wreckage. Whether Elena Vasquez, financial investigator, and Elena Hartwell, devoted wife, could somehow become the same person. The doorbell rang again, and through the security monitor, I could see David standing on our front porch, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, his expression unreadable. He'd come home. I opened the door slowly, uncertain what I'd find in his eyes: anger, betrayal, understanding, or something else entirely. "We need to talk," he said quietly. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. "Yes, we do."